Hello, School Transportation Nation. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Tony Corcoran, publisher and president of School Transportation News, and this podcast is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, our friends at Adroit, and the Propane Education Research Council. Today on the podcast is TSD keynote Shelly Rutage, a school psychologist and licensed clinical social worker with Salem Kaiser School District in Oregon. She'll be talking with Mr. Ryan Gray. And speaking of Ryan, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Tony. It's always good to be here. Good to be talking student transportation and all the hot topics of the day.
We got some hot topics for you guys. Before we get to those, we got a message from one of our sponsors. All right, guys, we have a great green tip for you this week, brought to you by the Propane Education Research Council. They want to talk to you about propane. It's energy for everyone. Did you know that school buses fueled by propane can help you reduce emissions in your community while saving you money? Propane school buses have a lower average carbon intensity than electric school buses over their lifetime by more than half, and they emit up to 96% less nitrogen oxide than diesel buses. All of this from fleets with the lowest total cost of ownership. It's no wonder propane is the most widely used alternative fuel in the school bus industry. You guys can learn more at betterourbuses.com. That's betterourbuses.com. All right, we're back. Ryan, all right, hit us with the latest and greatest headlines out there in the world of school transportation.
Absolutely. So coming up next week, folks, we've talked a lot about it. E-rate. School bus Wi-Fi hotspots. Is that federal program going to open up and include funding for school buses? There's actually been some movement on that. We were talking about that rather recently, Tony. Tony, I think you were asking, like, hey, whatever happened to this? I wrote an article not too long ago talking a little bit about some of FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel's plans to expand E-rate to school buses. And the FCC is meeting on this topic next week, October 19th. So it's looking pretty favorable, talking to the sources this past week. Looking forward to that meeting. So as you know, we've reported for a couple of years now, Rosenworcel is a champion of expanding the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that created E-rate to include school bus Wi-Fi hotspots. Basically, there's a declaratory ruling that she issued a couple years ago. That is now a proposed rulemaking. That's what FCC is looking at. That's what they're going to be voting on October 19th. So, interestingly, in looking at that proposed rulemaking, it actually mentions that the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which of course was the last couple of years during the pandemic, really trying to close that homework gap, provide funds, one-time funds, which turned into two-time funds for school districts to use some of that money for school bus Wi-Fi. Now kind of, expanding that again to E-rate. This rulemaking says that on average, Wi-Fi for school buses is $1,840 per school bus per year. So the initial findings in this rulemaking indicate that the potential impact on the E-rate program budget would be nominal compared to the substantial benefit reaped by students. That was one of the concerns that Senator Ted Cruz, among others, raised with Rosenworcel last month. They were basically objecting to including school bus Wi-Fi under E-rate. It certainly seems, though, that the writing is on the wall. So we'll be waiting with bated breath, Tony. Again, just days away. We'll definitely have a news article on that.
Well, it'll be interesting too, Ryan. I got to sit in on a webinar hosted by Kajit and Cradlepoint last week that we hosted with Billy Hewish from Farmington Schools. And Billy talked a lot about some of the data he had seen, and he really had installed Wi-Fi on his school buses. And this was done prior to all this funding because he wanted it on some activity trips for children to have access to do homework. And he said the results were astonishing how much they were engaged. And now, if you're not familiar with Khajiit or Cradlepoint, they have software that basically mitigates what websites you can go to. So Billy was talking about different websites like Clever and Kahoot and Grammarly. And these are all educational sites that I'm actually familiar with because I have children in elementary school and they use all these products to engage with homework and assignments. So it was really cool for me to hear from his perspective that he can see all the activity of these sites. Now, he did talk about kids trying to go to Facebook and TikTok and those requests being necessarily denied because they didn't meet the test or whatever the parameters were of the screening. But I think the tale of the tape is that he saw immense value in student education and was able to bring those results back to his administration and basically share those. And the outcome was he got more Wi-Fi on more school buses and the students got a better engagement with their educational resources. And now you see a lot of schools offering Chromebooks or Apple products almost on a one-to-one basis. Now, sometimes like for our daughter, we bought her a Chromebook that matched the one that she had at school so she could engage in her educational activities from that standpoint. But these are all things that help with student success, Ryan. And I know we have just talked this to death, but the school bus as an extension of the classroom, man, we talk about it, guys, but like actually living it and seeing the results and proving to the administration that the school bus is exactly that. And it can be a place of learning for rides that are longer. And, in the webinar, the representative from Khajiit had talked a lot about the actual ride time, right? And again, the data can be skewed, but it was like 47, 48 minutes is the average ride time. You can get some work done in that period. Now, kids may socialize and stuff, but it is a place that could be done. So, and we'll see also with the advent of electric school buses, we have seen guys like Khajiit be standard on electric school buses, which I believe that's on IC Bus, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yep,
and so that now with a quieter ride, it's not as noisy. Are students going to become more productive based on a quieter environment in the school bus? It'll be very interesting to see if that has an effect on engagement with these types of technologies.
Absolutely. And, for TSD next month, too, we're looking at innovative uses of technology. And that's one of the aspects of this that I'm planning to have in that session where we're talking about Wi-Fi for students with disabilities. I mean, we're seeing, limited, but more definitely examples out there of districts adding technology specifically for their special needs routes that engage the students. Some of the technology can be used in a calming effect, distract them maybe from their conditions. One of the districts in Texas I know is now specifying flip down monitors on their special needs buses so that the students can engage with, maybe educational shows or whatnot. How does Wi-Fi factor into that? Especially with, if E-rate opens up and starts funding school bus Wi-Fi, that's another ability of school districts and bus companies too, ostensibly, to utilize some federal money to add more technology to their buses that can impact that student ride time. And another topic we're talking about next month in TSD of excessive ride time. So again, start seeing how all these things connect. And to your point about extension of the classroom, I know that was one of the big things when I was talking with the consortium of school networking that Khajiit and Cradlepoint and a lot of others are members of. They're championing this proposal that FCC is voting on as well. Last month when I was talking about that letter from some Republicans in Congress, Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers of Washington joined Senator Ted Cruz. McMorris Rogers is the chair of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. They're the ones that sent that letter over the summer to Rosenworcel saying, no, this is a misuse of funds and it's supposed to be for buildings. And Rosenworcel in her response said to them, hey, essentially, school buses are extension of the classroom. They're part of school campuses. And if you look at essentially all of the state regulations out there looking at schools and defining them, whatever the topic might be that they're covering, you can often find a subnote that includes school buses under school campuses. So again, it seems like the writing is on the wall for this. Definitely, any way that the school bus industry, the student transportation industry can get federal money and ongoing federal money, that's a big win. So again, a matter of days, we'll find out what the verdict is.
Yeah, and it was interesting, Ryan, that you mentioned special needs, because Billy on the call specifically cited that he thought special needs benefited almost the most of all the routes that he had been servicing. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, Billy. So to me, this is kind of this ongoing dialogue, guys, of where the appropriate use cases for technology. And Ryan couldn't be more timely with everything happening in the market. So I'm really excited to see hopefully a positive outcome with this vote. Obviously, whenever you're spending money, there's always going to be some opposition, but hopefully there's more ayes than nays, and we'll have something to talk about. But guys, keep an eye on stnonline.com for those latest headlines and updates. I'm sure we will be on it if we get a positive outcome and news flash you and have lots of stories. So keep an eye on that. All right, Ryan, we'll kind of keep heading with the headlines. What else you got in store for us?
All righty. Well, speaking of stnonline.com and especially most read stories, hopefully you caught this one. I know a lot of you did out there looking at our traffic. Convicted murderer Jason Kleinard. Some of you might remember his name. He was 14 years old at the time of the 2005 murder of his Tennessee school bus driver, Joyce Gregory. I had just started, writing STN not too long before that happened. Remember it well. And he was released from prison. Really interesting story. We reported on it extensively at the time, of course. Joyce, the first known school bus driver to be killed, murdered in the line of duty. Certainly, we've had too many school bus drivers who've died in accidents or had medical emergencies behind the wheel. But to basically everyone's knowledge, the first to be murdered in the line of duty transporting students. For those of you who weren't around or don't remember, quick jog of the memory. Again, I mentioned that Kleinard was 14 years old. He had been suspended the day before, basically serving an in-school suspension for dipping snuff on the school bus. This had been an ongoing issue that he had been reprimanded for by Joyce. And he had actually just the week prior had returned to the school bus after serving a school bus suspension for fighting. Definitely there was some bad blood between the two. At least from Jason's standpoint, he made no secret about how he really hated her and thought she was picking on him. March 2nd, 2005, the bus came up to pick him up in rural Tennessee, Stewart County, Tennessee. He had his two nephews with him. He was pretty adamant that they board first. They did. She then went to receive him, and he pulled out a 45 caliber semi-automatic pistol and shot her 3 times. She tried to actually radio for help, but succumbed to her injuries. Very sad incident. Of course, the loss of the life of Joyce Gregory, her family, the school district there. She was known really being a mama bear, cared deeply for her students, but she was a disciplinarian as well, and she unfortunately, tragically lost her life. And then you have Jason was almost 15 years old when this happened. The article really highlights kind of some really poor, to say the least, representation that he got and that his family got. His lawyer essentially got him to agree to be transferred from juvenile court to adult court, where he was summarily convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, which in Tennessee he would have had to serve at least 51 years. So by the time he was convicted, I think he was only almost 16 years old. So he wouldn't have gotten out till he was in his 70s, or close to it. And, some post-conviction relief, he appealed several times, finally got his case heard by federal courts, and they remanded it back to juvenile court where, as we know, juvenile court, the oversight ends at age 19, and he is now a 33-year-old man. So he was released and he's out. And obviously, as you can imagine, the folks there who knew and loved Joyce are not very happy about this. But, it really, again, was that first time that certainly I knew of where, from a security standpoint, the industry took a double take and said, whoa, what, a school bus driver murdered doing her job. And, obviously, he was a young boy at the time, teenager. Hopefully he's learned his lessons. I understand he's living on the other side of the state now. So well away from the family and from the school district. But it was really interesting. Eric Watkins, who was the director of transportation then and now, he pointed to a lot of safety upgrades that occurred after that. I mean, 4 cameras were added to each school bus. They now train their drivers on 50 hours of paid training on driving alone with students on board. They have bus monitors on most of their buses, at least those with high rate of discipline issues. So, some things that certainly the entire industry has looked at least, in trying to make their school buses even safer, not only for the students, but for their staff. I mean, as we're going through this huge driver shortage, certainly not the type of headline that, new applicants would want to see. But, we know that it's happened, and it happened again, over a decade later when we had Chuck Pullen, who was murdered on his Alabama school bus. And that one actually drew even more national attention because the man who murdered Chuck, he had gotten on board and took one of the students, and they ran off and hid away in an underground bunker for several days. And the FBI eventually had to storm the bunker, kill the man to rescue the child. So that was on the nightly news, and that was a couple day affair. So, a sad state of affairs, but just, really illustrates how we've gotten to this point in time when, we're talking about school shootings and talking about students bringing weapons on the school bus. We've had a number of security and safety experts in our articles and speak to our conference attendees about the vigilance necessary and the training. So, I encourage you to read more about that incident at stonline.com.
Yeah, really heartfelt, Ryan. Obviously, a very visceral reaction from our audience on what the outcomes were from these situations. And, a lot of painful memories there that you brought forward, and people reacted to that. And obviously a really, really stressful time for the district and the families and the people involved in that situation. And it just bubbles up these memories when you try to kind of put that to rest. And here it is. The person that perpetrated the crime is back on the street, hopefully rehabilitated, so nothing like that happens again. But, it just points a light at the importance of security and training and being more vigilant, and, how technology can be part of that conversation. So thanks for bringing that up and sharing that great story. Guys, if you haven't read it, go to stonline.com. Deep dive. Ryan took a lot of time, took a lot of effort to pull that together for you guys. So be sure and check that out. Also, if you haven't seen it yet, our October issue is on the street. Go to the website, click on that October issue. Lots of great stories in there you can get into. But before we move on to the next headlines, we got a message from our sponsor. Adroit is an alternative student transportation platform that complements the school bus and helps districts with their special needs and McKinney-Vento transportation for students utilizing its fleet of specialized vehicles. Adroit provides world-class technology that connects all stakeholders involved in student transportation transactions. The company provides transportation solutions for school districts, counties, non-public schools, and school busing agencies agencies to assist their special transportation needs. You can learn more at goadroit.com. That's GoAdroit, spelled ADROIT.com. GoAdroit.com. All right, we're back. Guys, are you thinking about coming to the TSD conference November 15th through the 20th? It's a great time to lock in the early bird rate. The deadline's coming up on November 13th. We are days away. Make sure you save some money for your district, for your company. Come to the conference. We're going to have a great turnout, lots of education, some great keynotes. We got a keynote conversation coming up too with Shelly Rutage and Ryan here in just a second. So we're really interested in hearing what that's going to be like. We've had other keynotes on the podcast. So if you haven't caught that, go some older episodes of the podcast and listen into that. But really, guys, there's so much information around the area of special needs, training, technology. We also are lining up a first of its kind, never been done before, ride and drive experience for special needs specifically. So we've got a bunch of different sponsors that have jumped in on that are going to participate and show off technology, show off equipment. Obviously, electric vehicles are a big part of that conversation, but we've got child reminder safety systems. We've got technology being displayed with routing, connectivity, Medicaid reimbursement. So there's just a lot there. So we're really excited to kind of bring that to the conference as a new element to kind of get attendees engaged, bring value to the overall experience. We'll have a reception with drinks and food. So really great new element that we've added to the conference on. It's going to be Thursday, 11/16. So November 16th, be sure you show up. You don't need to register to be there for that. As long as you're a full conference attendee, you can participate as part of the overall value you get for being a conference attendee with us. So Ryan, any other kind of exciting things from the TSD conference you've got in your pocket? Maybe you're holding back a few sessions?
Yeah, I mean, we do have the agenda up. There are going to be some more additions. I mean, we're looking to bring back our wheelchair crash test data. Always a very popular session from Miriam Maneri of the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. She's one of our TSD Board of Advisors. Always great. She's always a fixture at TSD. She's of course going to be helping with NHTSA and also our OTPT transporter forum. So that one's also coming into focus.
It's always popular, Ryan. That's always a popular one.
Absolutely. And especially, that one too, with OTPT transporter forum, very vital this year because we've talked about it. There was that death earlier this summer on a New Jersey school bus that in some ways was reminiscent of the famous Cynthia Sue Savage case, which a lot of special needs transporters will remember that one. And if you don't, even more reason why you need to go to TSD. This is important stuff, folks. That case, as I talked about on a previous podcast, was really one of the defining moments for special needs back in 2002 when that case was decided, where school districts were told, hey, you know what, you guys are just as liable, if not more so, for the transportation of your students, the training of your staff, the oversight when you're using a third-party contractor. They were talking about school bus contractors at that point. Today, fast forward, we of course have school bus contractors still very much at play. NSTA says it's now representing about 40% of the industry, what's outsourced to school bus contractors. This incident that happened in New Jersey where a little girl choked to death as she was in a wheelchair, so a little bit different than Cynthia was, who was secured in a seat. But we've seen these cases of these students who are choking to death because of improper adjustment of their child safety restraint systems. And so that's really going to be diving into the equipment side of things and the training side of things, following up on a general session that we'll be having that morning with our legal experts, as well as compliance and safety. So really doing a deep dive on that, just really trying to bring to light all of these issues that student transporters are dealing with, to try to move the needle and just keep school bus safety at the forefront, arm the staff with as much information as possible. And hopefully, again, that this stuff by osmosis will trickle out there, that more state associations will pick up on a lot of this training and make sure they're doing as much as they can to get this out to their school district constituents. Something we always have to remember, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, STN reaches maybe the top 5% of school districts out there. I think we have, and Tony, the numbers better than I do, but our reach is several thousand school districts. There's 16,000 school districts in the nation. So if we're reaching, 4,000 school districts, there's 12,000 school districts that are not getting this message. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get that information out there? And it really takes a village. So, we start with the magazine, the website, conferences like TSD, and just, spread the good word. What you guys learn at these conferences, certainly take them back to your district, but share the wealth. Tell your friends, tell other people that you in your community, in your state about this training, whether it's, from us, from another organization. It's just the best way that we can make a difference and try to improve the service for the students.
Wonderful information, Ryan. Guys, if you want to learn more about TSD, go to tsdconference.com. It is November 15th through the 20th in Frisco, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, North Dallas Parkway. But Ryan, we got a great conversation coming up with you and keynote speaker Shelly Rutage, school psychologist, licensed clinical social worker for Salem Keizer School District in Oregon. Before we get to that, a message from our sponsor. Well, the votes are in and STN Expo attendees have spoken. TransFinder was overwhelmingly selected as the best software and best hardware for 2023 at STN Expo in Reno, Nevada. Yes, you heard that right. For the first time ever, TransFinder received the Innovation Choice Award for best hardware. And for the second year in a row, TransFinder has won the best software award, adding to numerous past awards TransFinder has won for its software products. TransFinder's move into hardware was driven by client demand. TransFinder now provides the tablet, the mounts, the card reader, and more as part of its one partner, one solution approach. Guys, you can learn more by visiting transfinder.com or calling them at 800-373-3609 or email them at getplus@transfinder.com and make sure you put STN podcast in the subject line.
Welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage. Shelly Rutage, a licensed clinical social worker, school psychologist with Salem Keizer School District in Oregon. Shelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
So really excited to talk to you. We've talked quite a bit over the last, probably year and a half, trying to get you out to TSD conference. November, it's coming up a little over a month away. You're going to be speaking a general session on Saturday, November 18th. It's going to be 10:30 a.m. on that Saturday. And the topic can sometimes be a little squeamish for folks, but certainly student transporters, educators, they know this full well, and especially when working with children with disabilities and special needs. Problematic sexual behaviors on special needs routes is the topic of your discussion. And before we get into it, because there's a lot of research behind this and a lot of nuance that's really important to understand. I mentioned that you're a school psychologist at Salem Keizer in Oregon and worked very closely with John Van Driel. Some of you out there in the nation will remember that name from this summer at STN Expo Reno. John, former director of some of their safety programs there at Salem Keizer. You worked really close with him.
Yeah, I mean, I would say John was been pivotal in my career development and why I ended up in this specific work, which is kind of an odd job to have. As you noted, it's a sensitive topic and some that makes people pretty squeamish. And yet we've come to realize in Salem Keizer how critical it is that we're looking at the vast spectrum of safety issues that can occur within a modern public school district, but more so, more particularly, really looking at the nuanced work when we're working with students who have of a special population, students with disabilities.
And so Salem Kaiser, you guys, it's pretty unique, at least from my standpoint. Maybe there's a lot more of these type of programs out of different school districts. But in working with John, I learned a lot about your safety and support response team, and you're a member of that currently. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what that does? And you alluded, I think, a little bit to it just a moment ago, but what is a safety and support response team, and how does it serve students as well as staff?
Yeah, great question. So John Van Driel is quite the godfather of student behavioral threat assessment. He is nationally renowned in the development of the Salem Kaiser Cascade model of student behavioral threat assessment. I think we're about 25 years in on that program. It's really considered the gold standard in the nation for a K-12 behavioral threat assessment system. But early in that work, they recognized that you cannot encompass all safety issues within a behavioral threat assessment program. And so issues of suicidality needs to be assessed separately. Issues of fire misuse of students needs to be assessed separately. And very much concerning sexual behavior needs to be assessed from a different perspective. And so in about 2008, they started to evolve what we call the Sexual Incident Response Committee, what we believe might be the first of its kind in the nation, it appears from what we understand, where we looked at a protocol-driven process for schools to assess circumstances of concerning sexual behavior of students. And through that work, it was sort of mirrored on the existing process that we had in behavioral threat assessment, our existing protocols, and evolving that process to look at sexualized behavior from that developmental perspective that's so critical when you're looking at a student's sexualized behavior. And I was hired, I want to say in 2012, to come over and take over that program and oversee its further development. And so, yes, I'm the lead psychologist for the Sexual Incident Response Committee component, which is one of 4 programs under that student's safety and support response system that you referenced earlier.
Okay. And if you all want to learn more about John Van Driel, who Shelly just gave a great kind of synopsis of the importance of that support and that training, you just head over to stnonline.com, enter in the search John Van, V-A-N, and then another word, Driel, D-R-E-A-L. You can learn about him and see what he spoke about in Reno in July. But getting back to what you're going to be talking about in Frisco next month, Shelly. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't come as a surprise to our attendees, our listeners, our readers, that when you're looking at sexual incidences, whether it be sexual assault or whatnot, in terms of students with disabilities and special needs, they're much more likely to be on both the receiving and the giving end mm-hmm. of those. Of course, we know that the same kind of parallels with bullying as well, more so than their non-disabled peers. So what is the research showing us or telling us? Speak a little bit about the difference between, okay, we have sexual assault where we look at something happens and it's basically unwanted, unwarranted, and it's sexual assault, but you need to factor in again the cognitive abilities mm-hmm. of the person, of the students in this case.
That's a great question, Ryan. So when we look at, I use 2 different phrases based on developmental stage. So what I would call problematic sexual behavior is sexualized behavior that is creating a degree of concern. And typically those are children under the age of 12. So we look at that there is a hearty portion of all children that will engage in some degree of sexual behavior in those latency years. And yet there are times where we need to look more critically at whether that behavior, that sexualized behavior, is actually harmful or non-normative in some way. And then when we're talking about teenagers, I might use the word sexual harming behavior, sexual misconduct. But please know that there's a full spectrum of sexualized behaviors that we might see in a K-12 setting. And that can be low-level kind of goofy banter, like pulling down your pants and flashing somebody. That could be sexual touching that's evolved out of curiosity, or even trauma experience. And that could be, as we kind of move our way up in grades, we might start seeing sexual harassment, unwanted touching, sexualized jokes or commentary that are just inappropriate for an education setting that may create a hostile environment or an uncomfortable environment for other students. And then the more egregious are when we're looking at delinquency cases or criminal cases of sexual assault. But what I want to come back to your question, Ryan, because it's so critical to this work, is that there is a big difference between what I would call a neurotypical youth who is engaged in harmful sexual behavior and a youth who has a developmental or cognitive disability and may be functioning like a much younger child. So we can't simply look at chronological age. We need to really examine what is their developmental stage and what are the circumstances in which it's occurring. Because to some degree, well, I'll use an example. Let's talk about masturbation for a second. Not a lot of people get to talk about masturbation in their work, but I get to. So masturbation, very typical behavior of really almost any age, right? Small children learning to explore their body, learning to understand their body, might touch their own genitals. All the way up to older children and teenagers who are touching their bodies for their own sexual gratification. So we can say that's a normative behavior. Well, it's normative within the privacy of their own home, in a private setting, such as a bedroom or a bathroom, and they're not exposing other people to that behavior. But you might have a student with a pretty profound disability who doesn't understand the nuances of public versus private. And so they're touching their genitals on a school bus, for example. They're exposing other children to that sexualized behavior, but not because they're trying to be menacing or trying to be harmful to those around them. It's because they lack the social awareness to understand the difference between public versus private, and it's directly correlated with their disability.
So it has a lot of implications, obviously, in terms of training, in terms of response. So on the first observation or note, in terms of when school bus drivers or attendants see this type of behavior, the importance that they are tapped in to that IEP. Oftentimes we see too many cases of non-communication. Mm-hmm. So I know one of the reasons this conference was formed was to try to bridge that gap, try to really encourage collaboration between special ed and the other auxiliary services that are serving students with disabilities with transportation, because far too many times transportation is not told vital information. Mm-hmm. And I think vital information would be, hey, you have a kid that's going to be on your bus who likes to pull his pants down and mm-hmm. starts masturbating on the bus. That's something, if the bus driver doesn't know that, can you just mm-hmm. imagine what they would respond?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a really valid point. And that's something we hear from our own drivers is they feel like they're a little bit in a vacuum of critical information to help support students having a safe route when they're at the helm of that bus. I have the utmost respect for how complex pupil transportation is in a modern society. We have a national shortage of drivers. We have all hands on deck on any given day where we have field coordinators and routers and mechanics driving routes because of this national driver shortage. And therefore, it's understandable that we don't have robust training, robust resources so that every driver on every route has all of the information and the tools that they need to be highly successful. We have really, really talented drivers who are working in very stressful conditions. And yet, based on if they're subbing for a route, they may know little to nothing about the students on that particular bus for that particular journey. And that being said, there's a variety of things that we try to do within our own system to try to tee up students and drivers to be more successful. Some lockstep systems, some collaboration. But you're right. One of the most difficult things, there are so many things that are difficult about being a bus driver, but one of them is that there's so many people that you're expected to communicate with. You've got your routers, you've got your supervisor, your field coordinator. You might be, you're communicating with parents a lot. And particularly with our students with disabilities that are doing that handoff when they disembark from a bus or at the onset when they're loading onto a bus in the morning. And then in addition, they have buildings that they're working with. They have IEP case managers, they have building administrators. That's a lot of people that they're expected to maintain consistent communication with. And it's no surprise that sometimes we falter in, does everybody have the information they need to be able to move forward in a thoughtful way to ensure that everyone is being transported safely?
Great point. And you had mentioned parents, and could only imagine because there's only so much information you can share, right? And one of the challenges and issues with privacy laws in schools is what I was mentioning earlier, a lot of vital information that the courts have said, hey, absolutely transportation needs to know that, but there's that disconnect where special ed thinks, oh, they can't be sharing that. And that's just only exacerbated when you bring in the parents, where what do the parents, what's their level of need to know? I know as a parent, I would certainly want to know if my daughter was on a school bus and there was a student with a cognitive behavior that would manifest itself in one of these problematic ways. But yet I know that there are those laws. So, it really puts transportation and that school bus driver between a rock and a hard place sometimes.
It is, but one thing I want to emphasize is there is no particular demographic of children that may engage in concerning sexual behavior, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of level of disability, regardless of home environments or life experiences. There are a variety of reasons why children will engage in sexual behavior. And I want to also emphasize that sexual behavior does not always serve a sexual function. An example is it might be managing stress. It might be to get attention. It might be to get a rise out of somebody. It might be to kind of stir things up because they're in a state of distress themselves. So sometimes I think we get stuck on this idea of kind of shock about children engaging in sexual behavior when they're an age in which we do not view them as sexual beings. But from a psychological perspective, we're actually all sexual beings from birth. We're just at different developmental stages related to that. But we go back to why it may occur, where it may occur, and recognize that it can actually occur in a lot of different settings for a lot of different reasons in a lot of different circumstances. But we can continue to kind of push forward with quality child abuse prevention education, being more thoughtful about the nuanced ways in which we help teach safe and healthy boundaries, particularly for our students with disabilities that have their own vulnerabilities. As you noted earlier, more likely to engage in harming behavior, but also much more likely to be exploited or harmed themselves. It's a very complicated population. And I think we have to consider that there's a variety of things we can do to try to be proactive. And then most importantly, once we recognize that there is a concern, how do we systematically assess how to best support that student in accessing their education despite those safety issues? And we really do have the ability to, I like to say that we're social engineers. We can engineer socially around most safety issues, and busing is no different. We are capable of developing assigned seating charts, thoughtful reflection of what kinds of students should be near each other or paired together, and what students should not be paired together based on vulnerability. So there's a variety of things we can do. But you're right. I do hear that people are frustrated by that lack of information or the potential risk. But I also feel like there's a lot of scary information out there that is not necessarily reflective of the day-to-day issues in schools.
Well, the sharing of information is always vital. And you mentioned seating charts, often underutilized. I think they can be utilized, whether general education or special education. Our readers tend to say that, those who use them find it's the number one behavior tool they have, in addition to maybe perhaps if there's seatbelts in their area.
And I think although the risk factors for complex behaviors are accelerated on a special programs route or some sort of special program transportation, and yet we are better equipped to engineer and strategize around those needs on a special programs route than we would be on a large scale bus running a general route, which is almost it is incredibly challenging to engineer around seating charts and safety issues on these large scale buses that have a large mix of students with a variety of needs.
Absolutely. And then you talk about that and mainstreaming, which is one of the tenets of IDEA. And I'm sure you could probably dive into that and there might be some questions. So those out there in the nation who are planning to see Shelly and come to Frisco next month, maybe we talk about that as well. Bring up those questions. Really looking forward to the topic. Again, like I said, it's been something that been really wanting to dive into for several years now, especially at TSD. So I'm glad that we have met and forged our own relationship and really looking forward to meeting you in person in Frisco.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm looking forward to it as well. Again, I have the utmost respect for how complex it is to provide people transportation, particularly in a modern society. And I am really excited we actually have great capacity to be very strategic about how we could transport kids safely by being realistic about some of these safety dynamics. So I'm super passionate about the work and in our capacity to continue to improve our systems, because getting kids to school is such a critical part of parity and education access. And it's just such an important component of what we do in public ed.
Absolutely. So again, Shelly Rutage, her keynote on Saturday, November 18th, problematic sexual behaviors on special needs routes. You can get more information at tsdconference.com as well as register. Early bird deadline is coming up soon, so lock in those savings. Shelly, thanks again. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate you having me.
Safe travels.
All right, guys, great conversation. Ryan, Shelly, appreciate those insights. Can't wait to see you at TSD in Dallas. That is going to be a great keynote speech. Special thanks to TransFinder, the Propane Education Research Council, and Adroit, our sponsors this week. Guys, we love you, nation. Make sure you go scnonline.com for all that latest news, analysis, updates on funding. We've got the EPA clean school bus funding. We've got the FCC vote coming up, California mandate all electric school bus vote. There's a lot of activity right now. We definitely want to keep you guys informed and keep your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, everything that affects you and school transportation. Guys, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to Pods Nation. We got a new episode every week, so be sure you tune in. We love you. We'll see you next week.